On Friday, President Trump falsely claimed protesters were not motivated by their concerns, but by paychecks from billionaire George Soros instead. Quote,
well, that's a very old, tired, anti-Semitic, very old anti-Semitic trick that people have played,
quote,
usually on the internet, Mika.
The very rude elevator screamers are paid professionals only looking to make senators look bad. Don't fall for it. Also, look at all of the professionally made identical signs paid for by Soros and others. These are not signs made in the basement from love. With the hashtag troublemakers. Trump's comments, which was examined and debunked by the Washington Post, came shortly after this exchange on Fox Business with Judiciary Chair Chuck Grassley.
Do you believe George Soros is behind all of this, paying these people to get you and your colleagues in elevators or wherever they can get in your face?
I tend to believe it. I believe it fits in his attack mode that he has.
Yamiche Alcindor, are these protesters paid, or what do you make of this?
No, I don't think the protesters are paid by George Soros. But even further, what I want to say is that the Republican Party and a lot of the Republican leadership are really acting like Donald Trump. I've been really taken aback by covering President Trump and all this conversation that people had about him coming in and maybe being somehow watered down by the Republican leadership, and maybe there are adults in the room who will make President Trump act in a different way. And what we've seen instead is that everyone starts acting like President Trump. When Brett Kavanaugh testified, he was talking about the Clintons' revenge. He was talking about the 2016 election. Lindsey Graham is using the word slut whore. There's this idea that President Trump has really lowered the decorum in a lot of people's minds of what you can say, and really have allowed people to be more raw. And some people like that. There are a lot of Trump supporters who say, we like this brash talk. We like the idea that people aren't being politically correct. But I think long term, there are a lot of people who are questioning, do we want our senators to be saying the word slut whore when we talk about the Supreme Court nominees? Do we want people to be talking about political revenges when we're thinking about the Supreme Court?
And also, do we, Mark McKinnon, want the chairman of the Judiciary Committee to pick up an anti-Semitic slur and run with it?
Well, Joe, one thing I'll say about the paid protesters line is that anybody who said that obviously didn't actually go out to the halls or the grounds of the Capitol and see and talk to any of these women. So what they're saying with this charge is that, yeah, George Soros paid some people to go out and publicly tell their rape stories, right, or to tell their sexual assault stories. I mean, the stories that you'd hear just walking around the halls were so gripping, so terrifying, so emotional. And people were just, spontaneously combusting into tears about this trauma from their lives. And the notion that they were being paid to do that is just outrageous, really.
But really, and John, you look at this, you have a cable news host whipping up frenzy about George Soros. You have the President of the United States tweeting about it. You have the Senate Judiciary leader talking about George Soros and this anti-Semitic conspiracy. It reminds me of exactly what we have a guest coming on at 8:30, a very well-respected man who when talking about why he decided to leave the Republican Party this weekend, said they control all three branches of government, and yet they still act as if they are victims of some grand conspiracy.
Absolutely. And this goes back, I think we're looking at basically a 60-year drama here. And I don't think we can look at it in isolation. And a lot of this conversation, a lot of these tropes, as you identify them, come from the early 1950s. They come from the people who joined the John Birch Society, who thought that Dwight Eisenhower was, quote, a dedicated agent of the communist conspiracy, because he'd worked with Franklin Roosevelt, whom the same people believed had been working with Stalin on behalf of Stalin at the end of the Second World War. Remember, 20 years, 1932 to 1952, the Republicans were out of power. Immense anger rose up on the right wing. I mean, now people get this way after 8 years. Double that, and then add 4 years. And you begin to get some sense of how these things change. The other thing about that period is we think that now, if I had a dime for every time someone said, well, it's cable news, it's the internet, Well, you know, Fort Sumter was pretty bad. You know, the reaction to Yalta, the reaction to Eisenhower not rolling back the New Deal led to this mainstreaming, in many ways, of conspiracy. And that drove politics in the 1950s and 1960s. At the same time, Eisenhower, after that 20-year drought, put Earl Warren on the court, put Judge Brennan on the court. What did they do? 1954, they integrate the schools. 1955, they affirm that with a second decision on all deliberate speed. 1962, they ban sectarian school prayer. They rule for defendant rights. Suddenly, heading into the Nixon era, you have a conservative movement that believes that Eisenhower had sold them out early on. Then Nixon appoints 4 justices, only one of whom turns out to be a conservative in the mold they wanted. A Nixon appointee writes the Roe decision. So then George H.W. Bush puts David Souter on the court. This is a long-term conversation about and momentum building about we're never going to be fooled again. It's a Scarlet Hera thing. They're never going to be hungry again. The right is never going to be fooled again. And that's what I think Senator Graham, Senator McConnell, they're playing off this deep storm system that's been building for 60 to 70 years.
Well, coming up, the U.S. Department of Justice will soon own a condo at Trump Tower and a house in the Hamptons, all courtesy of Paul Manafort. We'll explain that. Plus, a veteran Saudi journalist and Washington Post columnist vanishes after entering the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Turkish officials say he was murdered by Saudi agents, but Saudi Arabia is calling that allegation baseless. Morning Joe will be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.